Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 959 for July 4th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
Bourbon and wine consumption of the white oak is less than 3% of the total hardwood that's harvested in a year in the United States. So it's a very concentrated focus, but it's also a very valuable focus for sure.
American white oak is critical to whiskey makers around the world, but there are concerns about the long-term sustainability of the nation's white oak forests. Greg Roshkowski of Brown-Forman is part of the White Oak Initiative, a collaboration bringing together foresters with the people who depend on the forests to look at ways of preserving them for the future. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
People never forget the person who introduced them to Redbreast. And then those people go on to introduce others to Redbreast. And soon the flock has grown exponentially. It's like a pyramid scheme. Without any of the bad stuff, of course.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We're going to start off this week with a couple of retirements. First off, longtime Heaven Hill president Max Shapira has announced his plans to step aside from day-to-day responsibilities at the company on September 1st. He's going to assume the role of executive chairman, while his daughter Kate Latz and her husband Alan Latz will become co-presidents of Heaven Hill. Max has been with the family-owned company since 1970. Next up, Diageo Master Blender Maureen Robinson has turned over her blending notebooks to the company archives. After 45 years with Diageo, she's been responsible for crafting some of the world's great single malts and blends, and we wish her well in her retirement. In other news, the Bardstown Bourbon Company is expanding. It's acquiring the Green River Distilling Company in Owensboro, Kentucky, along with Green River's production facility in South Carolina. No purchase price was announced. The deal is expected to close later this month. The deal marks the first major move for Bardstown Bourbon since the Pritzker family's private equity firm bought a majority stake in the company this spring. We've talked about geographical indicators like Scotch whiskey before, and now the Scotch Whisky Association has acquired the legal right to protect the term Scotch whiskey in the U.S. It's received a certification trademark for the term Scotch whiskey. That gives the SWA even more clout in going after counterfeiters and those who infringe on Scotland place names and whiskey regions. Scotch exports to the U.S. totaled almost $1 billion last year, nearly a fifth of all Scotch exports worldwide. The Gordon family of William Grant & Sons fame is launching the new House of Hazelwood collection of whiskeys. It's a separate venture from William Grant & Sons and will feature whiskeys from the family's private collection, including some laid down by the late Charles Gordon. His collection includes the first casks of Girvan single-grain whiskey filled 58 years ago, along with a pair of 56-year-old blended Scotch whiskeys. There is also a new legacy collection, including a 46-year-old blended Scotch, a 43-year-old blended grain whiskey, and a 39-year-old blended malt. The whiskeys will be available through specialist whiskey shops in the UK and the houseofhazelwood.com website. Meanwhile, the Thompson family of Perthshire has been distilling, blending, and passing down casks of rare Scotch whiskies for generations. Now, the 9th generation of the family is bottling some of those casks. Finn Thompson is launching his initial collection with a cask of Glenlivet 50-year-old. The whiskeys will be available at specialist whiskey shops in the UK, along with Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Finally, the folks at New Hampshire's Tamworth Distilling have done it again. In the past, they've made whiskeys flavored with venison, as well as musk from the anal sacs of beavers. Now they've worked with researchers from the University of New Hampshire to make a green crab-flavored whiskey. Green crabs are an invasive species in New England, and the rising ocean temperatures have caused the green crab population to explode. There are no natural predators in the area to keep the population in check, and while green crabs are edible, there's no commercial market for them. Tamworth's Crab Trapper whiskey blends a crab stock cooked down from thousands of the critters with a bourbon base and spices. The distillery's founder describes the taste as, quote, a briny and better version of Fireball. Yum. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Our Happy Hour live webcasts are taking a break for the rest of the summer, but will return in September. Thanks to everyone who joined us this past Friday night for a rare Ask Mark Anything webcast. We had a lot of good questions, and I hope I answered them to your satisfaction. You can catch the on-demand replay of that and all of our previous webcasts at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Thanks to Whiskey Jason in Germany for letting us know about some upcoming whiskey events in Germany, including Whiskey Spring this coming weekend in Schwetzinger. McTeers has its next whiskey auction this Friday in Glasgow, Scotland. The Whiskey Rebellion Festival takes place Friday and Saturday in Washington, Pennsylvania. And the Bourbon Women will have a special Uncle Nearest tasting with Victoria Edie Butler this Saturday in Tampa. The Black Bourbon Society's next open door tour stop is the weekend of July 14th through the 16th in Los Angeles. Whiskey Live Sydney is on the 15th and 16th in Australia, and Whiskey Live USA is July 23rd and 24th in Nashville, Tennessee. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it, and we'll add it to the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. It's brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and 3 continents, and online. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. The whiskey industry's share of the market for American white oak is minuscule compared to that for lumber, furniture, and other wood products, but it's one of the most visible uses for white oak wood, and there is a push within the industry to make sure that American white oak forests are sustainably managed for the future. The White Oak Initiative is bringing together forestry experts with the industries that depend on forest products, and that includes the whiskey industry. Greg Roshkowski oversees Brown-Forman's cooperages in Kentucky and Alabama, along with stave and heading mills around the Midwest, and the White Oak Initiative is one of his pet projects. Tell me first of all about the White Oak Initiative industry-wide, because I know this is important to the entire industry, right?
Yes, it's something that's very important to the industry as a whole. And as we look at so many growth and expansion plans throughout the industry, everybody understands that none of this happens without the white oak, that's used in the barrels. So obviously, knowing the long term or long runway for the growth of white oak and how vital it is to the industry. There's been quite the concentration and focus, but the white oak initiative just doesn't, isn't only distillers and cooperages and barrel makers. It's also, American Forestry Foundation, as well as Wild Turkey Federation and other people that are very interested in just maintaining healthy forests for all the reasons that, forest, whether it's leisure, whether it's, like I said, the white oak, for bourbon enjoyment, or just, for the other intrinsic value of white oak. So it's something that's got quite a lot of attention here lately, and we're just looking to capitalize on that momentum.
How so? I mean, I know that it takes a lot of good forestry management to preserve the white oak and to preserve the forests, but what's the status of our forests now?
The forests are in very good shape. So I think there's, some of the data is fractured, as far as it's maintained state by state. So there's kind of some information that doesn't always get compiled, but the forest is healthy. But there are some signs that, from a regeneration standpoint and things like that cause some concern. And there's some initiative to make sure that we are focusing on the regeneration of the forest. So, and what might grow back after the forest has been harvested or, logged in a certain way. If you don't manage that regeneration, there'd be a lot more of certain species like poplar and some of the other ones that are broad-based or, broadleaf based and, that cut out a lot of sunlight to the forest that would affect what that forest looks like, 20, 30 years from now. So we just, are making sure that people have a plan, for regeneration, as well as making sure that they execute that plan and doing everything we can to make people aware of the situation that we need to be, making sure we understand how that forest regenerates.
It really is a critical element for the industry because the white oak that you need really only grows in a few places, right?
Yeah. I mean, it grows throughout probably, 14 to 15 states through the United States. But, that's, like I said, the timberland that's harvestable is, concentrated in certain areas. So, we need to make sure that that's where the focus is. Like I said, the American hardwood industry, in years past, it's harvested up to, 12, 13 billion board feet. And, in 2020 with COVID, it only harvested about 5.5 billion board feet. So, so it's the hardwood industry as a whole hasn't recovered to the point it's taken as many trees. And, so we need to make sure that industry is healthy because we're just a subset of that. So the bourbon and wine consumption of the white oak is less than, 3% of the total hardwood that's harvested in a year in the United States. So it's a very concentrated focus, but it's also a very valuable focus for sure.
What other industries are you competing with?
We compete obviously with the lumber industry, which, is basically can use the white oak for whether it's flooring, whether it's furniture, whether it's housing construction, all those industries can, are consumers of white oak. But like I said, in the past, we've been able to, or throughout history, we've paid a premium for those specific logs that qualify as stave and heading logs, ones that we can, utilize in barrels and will hold the liquid we need to hold. So when that premium kind of evaporates and lumber becomes so in demand, whether it's through your your Home Depots and your Lowe's that people are using lumber, whether it's housing starts and framing. So there was such a tremendous demand over the last 18 months that we saw, severe price increases that we continue to affect the industry now and will affect the price of barrels going forward.
Let's turn to Brown-Forman specifically. What are you doing at the company level to make sure that you're using as much sustainable wood as possible?
Well, for us, like I said, it's making sure that the people that we buy our logs from, we operate 3 stave mills that produce about 50% of our material. And then we buy stave and heading from about 12 to 15 stave and heading mills. So for us, it's making sure that all of them have are using basically what we call a master logger program and master loggers, so that the people that are harvesting the white oak are harvested in a manner that we know is going to be healthy for regeneration, that they have, understand the effects of making sure there's the canopy is to a point where sunlight can penetrate to the floor for the forest floor for regeneration, knowing that, that the earth has been replaced in a manner that the water runoff isn't going to, deteriorate the soil. So all of our, wood is basically harvested by people, the master loggers, as well as we always encourage our landowners to work with a certified forester to understand that understanding that this isn't a one-time thing, that they have land to manage and it needs to be managed like you would any sort of other crop. It's just over a 40 to 50 year horizon. So to mark the trees, to understand their growth, to make sure they have a harvest plan that fits what their goals are, as well as something that's sustainable for generations to come.
And then how do you maintain that wood once you get it to the cooperage? Because Brown-Forman is one of the few companies that owns its own cooperages.
Yes. And so for us, basically, we want to utilize as much of that log as we possibly can. So knowing that, our sawmills or our stave and heading mills, we're trying to make sure as much of that log possibly that we can gets into that final finished barrel. So for us, that's very important. Slowing down to make sure that we're cutting in a way that maximizes the use of the wood. We've made a tremendous investment in our cooperage here in Louisville with some scanner technology, as well as some of our cutting machines that basically electronically evaluate each piece of wood that comes through to make sure we're maximizing that wood, minimizing our wood loss. And also everything that there is no waste on that log. So a log that's cut at our stave mill, the byproducts will be chips and that'll go to a paper mill, or the bark will be used as mulch. And then any wood waste that happens at the cooperage will be used primarily for horse bedding and pellet shavings, or pellets for barbecuing and things like that. So there's no waste in that in the system, and that's been one of our main focuses at Brown-Forman for quite some time.
I know when I toured the cooperage with you in Louisville a few years ago, you were using wood scraps and sawdust and using that to fuel the boilers, right?
Yeah, we have since replaced that system. The system got a little inefficient and heavy reliance on maintenance as it got to be 40 to 50 years old. And we've since switched to natural gas since the last time you visited. And that's why making sure an outlet for, that byproduct is, something that we can manage. And like I said, it's amazing that some of the interconnectivity of the industries around Kentucky, as far as being known for horses and bourbons, the fact that white oak is used for the aging of bourbon, as well as because of the acidity of white oak, it makes tremendous horse bedding. So as far as keeps disease and any insects kind of to a low tolerance. And some of the horses around this part of the world are incredibly pampered because they have so much value to them, and keeping them healthy is so vital that white oak used as horse bedding is a very very vital component as well. So it's, like I said, it's interesting just some of the connectivity in some of our Kentucky and the region's, capstone industries.
How much support is there for this project within the industry? Are you getting good support?
Yes, there's tremendous support throughout the industries. All the major barrel manufacturers are obviously part of the White Oak Initiative, as well as most of the major distilleries around the area. I think everybody is very focused, and our government relations group was integral in spearheading. In Congress, they just launched a White Oak caucus. So spearheaded by Congressman Barr, who represents Versailles, Kentucky, and that whole area where Woodford Reserve is. And when we initially started talking about this White Oak caucus, they were thinking, didn't understand how big it would be, how many states really produce, white oak to some extent, as well as how many states are reliant on it. So if you throw in, California and New York have significant wineries, so understanding that their constituents are very, white oak's vital to the wine industry. This White Oak caucus that launched about a month ago has been seeing, a lot of positive stories and results and a lot of momentum, so that we can capitalize on some of the legislation that's out there, as well as some of the funds that are available through the farm bill that's passed in Congress I think every 3 years, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's every 5 years.
Is it 5 years? Okay. But I know it's up sometime, but just making sure we have a seat at the table, during those discussions is also something that's been very, very vital to, making sure that, the news is out there and people understand what we're trying to do, and understand the goals and objectives, as well as getting some funding behind it.
Give me a worst case scenario. What happens if this doesn't work?
That if this doesn't work, I think there'll be a more detailed focus on it. I think right now we're into Mother Nature does an incredible job of the regeneration. So all we have to do is to make sure that we're keeping her as healthy as we possibly can, and making sure that things are restored to their natural manner. If this doesn't work out, then, or if something happens, we'll probably have to come in artificially making sure that white oak is a higher concentration in certain areas. We have, like at Jack Daniel's, we have a white oak tree farm that we have been working on. The University of Tennessee has been working on for over 20 years to cultivate hardy acorns, basically for regeneration. So now there's no, this isn't a warehouse or commercial or anything like that where they go around planting pine seedlings and replacing. You're never going to get to that kind of effectiveness with, planting itself. But if that ever becomes quite an issue, I think that's what it would have to resort to. But I don't see that that becoming an issue, hopefully, for quite some times. But some of the forestry managing practices that you have to understand, white oak is very heat resistant, where some of the competitors aren't nearly as heat resistant. So a forest fire or some controlled burning of a forest once it's been logged to promote the regeneration of white oak and basically give it a little head start is something that is vital to the regeneration of the forest and making sure it comes back in the percentage content that it was before.
How much does climate change play into all this in terms of that sweet spot where the good trees grow for bourbon making or bourbon barrels?
I think our forests are very adaptive. I think, like I said, we see, so I don't know how much that climate change really plays into it. I think, like I said, we're obviously seeing some warmer temperatures, some things exposed, some quicker growing, areas that we've experienced in the past, but I don't think there's nothing really that's been detrimental. It's just a migration of some places that probably didn't have much white oak in the past growing a little more. But white oaks, grows basically, from the upwards of Minnesota all the way down to, lower Alabama and some of those places, so it's a very hardy species. And I think that's been one of the key components is for us to just kind of help it stay that way versus, trying to improve it.
I think that about does it. Is there anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, not really. I think, like I said, the White Oak Initiative is something that everybody is very involved with. I think there's a lot of, universities and things like that, forestry programs that are out studying things. I think one of the key components is just understanding, if you're doing measurements and trends on plots, even if there's a decrease in the forest and you take and extrapolate something like that out for 50 years, it's going to be an issue, so we've got to be looking forward 50 to 60 years to really understand what the impact's going to be, as to what we're doing right now on the forest in that time period.
Thanks to Greg Roshkowski for spending some time with us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Every once in a while, samples get delayed in the mail, and that's what happened with Bunnahabhain's Fégile whiskies, but they did eventually make it here, including the Avon Erg. It's a no-age statement Isla single malt matured in ex Pedro Jimenez octave casks and bottled at 50.8% ABV. The nose has notes of milk chocolate, ginger, raisins, raspberries, and a soft oakiness. The taste has a good balance of cinnamon and toffee notes, along with hints of raisins, chocolate, and dried fruits with a subtle touch of oak. The finish has lingering cinnamon and toffee notes in excellent balance, and I'm scoring the Bunnahabhain Avon Erg a 93. Bunnahabhain also unveiled a surprise release for the Isla Festival, a 1989 Oloroso cask finish that spent its last 6 years in an Oloroso sherry cask. It's bottled at 45.4% ABV. The nose has touches of walnuts, berries, a hint of black cherries, and oak. The taste is thick and luscious with an excellent balance of fruits and spices. Hints of pears and apple cobbler complement touches of cinnamon and peppercorns, while hints of walnut and black cherries add complexity in the background. The finish is long and luscious, and I'm scoring the Bunnahabhain 1989 Oloroso cask finish a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute. Our tasting notes are brought to you each week by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey, where they're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their waterfront distillery in Baltimore. Their premium canned cocktails are a refreshing, convenient option while you're playing a round of golf, sitting poolside, or spending a day at the beach, with flavors like lemon tea fizz and honey paloma. Now available across the U.S., you can find them at a retailer near you by visiting sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. Missouri is one of those states where lawmakers have set an official designation for what can be called a, quote, Missouri bourbon. And the new Ben Holiday Bottled in Bond Missouri Straight Bourbon from Holiday Distilling is one of the first whiskeys to meet that standard. It includes being distilled from Missouri-grown grain and matured in oak trees from Missouri forests. And, of course, as a bottled in bond whiskey, it's bottled at 50% ABV. The 6-year-old bourbon has a nose full of dried fruits, honey, apples, and a hint of cocoa beans. The taste is syrupy thick with notes of black pepper, honey, cinnamon, apples, and a soft oakiness. The finish is long and spicy, with a hint of cherry cola underneath. I'm scoring the Ben Holiday Bottled in Bond Bourbon a 91. Finally, Jack Daniel's has come out with its strongest whiskey ever, and the strongest whiskey I've ever tasted. The 2022 Coy Hill High Proof Distillery exclusive bottling comes in at a whopping 76.6% ABV. We are talking HazMat flammable level here, gang. The nose has notes of caramel cola, black cherries, honey, hints of leather and tobacco, and cocoa beans. And here's the surprise, there's no alcohol burn at all. The taste is thick, astringent, and spicy with intense black pepper, balanced by caramel cola and honey notes. The finish is long and spicy with a nice balance of spices, caramel cola, honey, and dried fruits. I'm scoring the Jack Daniel's 2022 Coy Hill High Proof Edition a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cast finish or our 8-year Mizunara cast finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Had a couple of questions come in at the end of our Ask Me Anything webcast Friday night that I did not see until after the show. Here's one from David and Carolyn Taylor in Australia. Which would you prefer, a hands-on distillery or a computer-run distillery for your whiskey, as a hypothetical question? Interesting question, and as I made very clear during the webcast, it is a hypothetical question since I have absolutely no desire to own a distillery. But if I had my choice, I'd prefer a hands-on distillery, just because there's something unique about them in a day where lots of distilleries are computer-controlled. True, the consistency may not always be spot on, but I'll take the occasional changes in the spirit once in a while, since they help give character to the final whiskey. Now here's one from Ivan Stoller. What other tipples do you drink and love? Rum, Calvados, or sake? Well, I've got to be honest with you. I'm busy enough keeping up with what's going on in whiskeys to get involved with other spirits. Personally, if I'm not sipping a whiskey, you're probably going to find me with a cold beer, especially when it's hot outside like it is today. Thanks again to everyone for the great questions Friday night. And you don't have to wait until the next Ask Me Anything show if you have a question, suggestion, or anything else that you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world. You can always find me on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or just email me. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Isla's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Let's go back to our discussion of American white oak sustainability for a minute. You might be wondering why it isn't as simple as just planting new trees where old oaks have been harvested. Well, nature takes care of that to a certain extent, as acorns fall from the white oaks and develop into seedlings over time. But those seedlings have to compete with other species of trees and plants for sunlight and water as they grow. Beech and poplar trees are especially hard for white oaks to compete with, and if a forest isn't managed properly to clear space for those oak seedlings, they can lose the battle against those other species. It's also hard because oak trees take decades to mature to the point where they're suitable for harvesting, unlike pine and other types of trees, which grow relatively quickly. Oak trees can take between 50 and 80 years before they're ready for harvesting. You see, foresters are a lot like whiskey makers. They understand the fruits of their work today will be enjoyed by future generations. If there is something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities. And what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.